start the proceedings.
Thank you, Roy sir. Good morning, one and all. I welcome Dr. Prashant Agnihotri to the forenoon session of the last day of Teachers Training Program on ML with Python. Introducing the speaker's profile, Dr. Prashant Agnihotri is working as an assistant professor in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at our Indian Institute of Technology, Bhilai. He completed his doctoral degree from University of Manitoba, Canada. He is a postgraduate from University of North Dakota, USA, and a graduate from Rajiv Gandhi Pradyogiki Vishwavidyalaya, Bhopal. His focal functioning research domains are application of power electronics in power systems and renewables, microgrid dynamics and control, machine learning and AI applications in power systems. Dr. Agnihotri has to his credit more than 10 research publications in journals and conferences of international and national repute, almost all relevant to real-time automation in power systems and power control devices. So your teaching expertise falls in subject domains as power electronics, application of power electronics in power systems and renewables, power engineering, microgrid, dynamics, and control. He is also actively engaged in an ongoing sponsored project these days, the project tenure being 2020 to 2023. The title goes as Deep Learning Based Real-Time Hardware in Loop Simulation for Islanding Detection and Protection in Microgrid. I guess I have spoken the title right, sir. Whose sponsoring agency is Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Dr. Agnihotri was selected as Canada's top 150 scientific innovators and was awarded with groundbreaking researchers international graduate scholarship at University of Manitoba. The award was given by Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of Manitoba. So having such an eminent speaker with us, I welcome Dr. Agnihotri to please take over the stage.
Thank you, Arpana ji, for that introduction. And thank you again, Dr. Parth Roy and Dr. Khare, for inviting me to give this lecture. First of all, I just want to confirm one thing, that am I audible properly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I'm just going to share my slides now. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
You are able to see that. Okay. And how about now?
Yes, sir. It is visible.
Okay, I'm just going to write something with my pen here. So please let me know if the pen markings are visible or not. Okay. So I'm just going to write something. Is this visible that I'm writing?
Yes,
perfect. Because last time what happened, I gave a presentation to one of the institutions, and after about 15 minutes, they told me that, sir, you're stuck at the first slide. So I just wanted to confirm that everything is going okay. So thank you very much again for inviting me to give this presentation. Um, what I'm going to talk about is the introduction of the machine learning and deep learning techniques for the smart grid. Um, so this is going to be a brief outline of my presentation. It's going to be about an hour and 15-minute presentation. I'll spare about 15 minutes in the end for Q&A. You can ask me questions regarding not just on the current presentation that I'm giving you, but also if you have any other questions related to research or whatever query that comes to your mind. And in my limited capability, if I have answers, I will try to answer those questions. Okay, so first of all, I will briefly introduce the machine learning methods, the architecture of machine learning, and what is the entire procedure in the machine learning. I believe in the last couple of days, you have been exposed to a variety of tutorials as well as sessions in which you have gone through learning about different hands-on exercises with the machine learning, for example, NumPy, and various other methods also in ML. So I will just pick one method, although this method in the Jupyter Notebook or in the scikit-lab, you can see it's just a one command one line command which is used for clustering. Okay, but which is a k-means clustering method. But I'm just going to take that method, describe a little bit more in detail, and then use that method for application in the power system. Okay, so if we talk about machine learning, um, then machine learning is actually a field of study um, that gives the computers the ability to learn, okay, without being explicitly programmed. And you might have seen that machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence, all these methods have been recently they have gained a lot of popularity. Okay, is it the case that these methods or this science as such, artificial intelligence or data science, was not available with us? The answer is no, because if I remember correctly, you can even go to the IEEE publications, and if you search for some artificial intelligence based techniques and the papers which people have used, that could be for various applications. Um, the applications actually goes way back to 1970s and 1980s. Okay, so it's not at all a new method. It's certainly a very old science. The only thing is that we have now resources by which we can make use of this science in a more efficient way. Okay, because data science, artificial intelligence, they mainly depend on data. Okay, so the bread and butter of this entire method, machine learning, data science, artificial intelligence, is data. Okay, um, did we have data before? The answer is yes and no. I mean, we had data, but it was not in a big amount. And sometimes you will see that generally huge amount of data is available to get to a very high accuracy. Okay. So what has changed recently is that in our industrial automation systems, and not just the industrial automation, but our regular usage, we are creating a huge amount of data every day. I mean, the cell phone you're using, the smartwatches people are wearing, um, and smart TVs that people have, smart devices. When I say smart devices, it could be your refrigerator, it could be your air conditioning. This is just I'm talking about on the day-to-day life in a common household. Now, when we talk about industry, this number goes, the amount of data that you are collecting is actually huge. Okay, so I will just give you an example that we are actually, IIT Bhilai is executing a project with Bhilai Steel Plant, and you might be aware about what the Bhilai Steel Plant is mainly known for. Of course, steel production, but they have India's biggest universal rail mill. Okay, so what they do, they produce the railway tracks. Okay, and they have to be of certain length. Okay, that is the guideline. The entire procedure is actually automated. So right from the blooms coming into the furnaces, and then going through various tandem mill processes, and then for the cooling, and finally manual inspection. The entire thing, if you leave the manual inspection at the end, then the rest of the entire process is completely automated. Okay, and if I'm not wrong, this entire system is actually designed by the ABB, and there are tons and tons of sensors at every point of the supply this chain. Okay, and they are collecting data of all different kind of types. For example, what is the amount of the stress that is being there on the railway track? What is the temperature in which is through it is going? If it is cooling down, what is the what I would say, what is the graph of cooling a particular pattern? If there is some mixing going on of some other chemicals or materials, what is the percentage of that? So every small detail is being captured, and they are captured at a very fast pace. For example, every 10 minutes, 15 minutes, this data is coming to you. Okay. The question is, can we make use of this data? Okay, and how we can make use of this data? For example, if we suppose we have a problem with us that we need to develop a line length of, let's say, x kilometers. Okay, kilometers is slightly longer. Let me just say x meters. Okay, so if I want to produce railway tracks of, let's say, x meters, and let's say due to some reason I am not able to produce it up to x meters, but some 80% of x. What is the reason behind it? Is it the temperature? Is it the stress which is being applied on the railway tracks that is being responsible for the reduction in the length? Or is it the cooling procedure that we are following? So every amount of data can be correlated with the final output. Okay, so now you can see I've just given you an example of how the real life problems work. Okay, so this is a very subtle problem which nowadays industries are trying to solve using huge amount of data that they have. The second question comes is that, let's say now we have data. What other thing has changed recently, which is resulting in a big, you know, um, a big development in this area of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all. So the another reason behind it is the rise in the support from the industry, definitely, but also the computational capability. Okay, so you can add one more point here, that is the computational capability. Now we have computers which are very fast, and they can process huge amount of data within fraction of seconds. Even fraction of seconds is a slightly, I would say, a longer time duration. Within milliseconds, a few cycles, essentially. And they can not just take the entire amount of data and perform computations. They can do a lot of other things also. Okay, the computational capability has greatly been enhanced in the recent years. Okay, previously people used to think about having 128 GB in their computers, in the personal computers, is a very big luxury. Okay, nowadays 128 GB in your cell phone is, sometimes people try to look at it in a very skinny eye, that okay, it is better if you have even more capability, okay, storage capability. So the demand has increased, and fortunately the computational capability and the way we can collect the data has also increased. By the way, artificial intelligence has not just resulted in the boom in the industry of people who are knowledgeable, or who should be knowledgeable and well equipped with this knowledge of machine learning and artificial intelligence. You can see that this has created a boom in other industries also. For example, when I say enormous amount of data available, who is responsible for collection of this data? It is certainly the sensors. Okay. Now sensors, I just told you, when you're talking about a universal rail mill example which I gave you, it has to go through various temperature fluctuations. Okay. So there has to be sensors which are very rugged in nature. Okay. So a huge boom has been gone into the sensors, semiconductor industries. Okay, computational capabilities, as a result of which the semiconductor industries, the processors, Intel, all these companies, there is a big boom now. Okay, data centers, the centers which are responsible for the collection of huge amount of data and to process it and to place it in a safe and a secure way, so that we can access it in a safe and a secure way. Okay, data centers, they are going in a big way. Now, when we say data center, automatically the maintenance of the data centers and the network engineers is going up in a big way now. Okay, so advancement or the requirement increase in one field has resulted in a overall general improvement in the various sectors of our various industries. Okay, So that's just a background. What I'm going to talk about in this lecture is the machine learning techniques and their division into several types. I mean, we can say that they can be classified into supervised, unsupervised, semi-supervised, reinforcement learning. But I will be specifically talking about the supervised and unsupervised learning uh, in this talk. I'm not going to spend much detail. I'm very sure that um, in the previous lectures, you might have heard about this unsupervised learning and supervised learning in much more detail. But just for the sake of revising it one more time, I will tell you that let's say if you start from the unsupervised learning, then you don't have any input data sets available to you, or I mean, data set, the labeling is not available to you. Okay. So whenever some data is coming to you based on the characteristics, you just try to cluster it in certain group of data. Okay. So for example, I will just give a very common example which you see nowadays in your classrooms. For example, so here is a classroom. There is a door. There are a bunch of students which are there. Okay. Of course, the teacher is here. So there is a blackboard here. And let's say there's some student comes and they try to sit in this particular area. Okay. And then there are some students who come and try to sit in this particular area. So sometimes this is a very common scene in Indian classes, that the girls and boys try to sit in a separate groups. Okay, so you can identify that okay, this group might be of boys or girls, or this could be a group of. There are two clusters which you can classify as boy and girls. Okay, anything can be there. I mean, this can be girl, this can be boy. And if some student is randomly entering into the class, and if they happen to sit up in this section, then you can guess. Okay, you can make a guess that okay, whether depending on the cluster which you're assuming that it is a particular the student is a boy or a girl. That's just one example. Okay. Um, so that is nothing but clustering. We will talk about clustering much more details in the subsequent slides, where I will actually show you that it's not just based on this guessing method. There is a proper mathematical way on doing the clustering technique, and I will discuss about that later on. Okay. So these are actually mainly used in the exploratory analysis, which is called as clustering, and dimensionality reduction. Okay. What is dimensionality reduction? Again, this is something I will talk in the subsequent slides. But the important part is that sometimes if you have huge amount of data, you may not want to use the entire data set for your algorithm. Okay. So what you may want to do is you may want to select only you may want to reduce the dimension of the data set in a way that the important extracted important information is extracted out of that data without losing the main information. Okay, so that is dimensionality reduction. There are various methods like principal component analysis and all which are there. So I will talk about dimensionality reduction later on with the help of an example as such. So that's an example of unsupervised learning. You can look in the website or in the literature. You will get lots of different unsupervised learning examples there also. As far as the supervised learning is concerned, the difference from the unsupervised learning is that the labeling is provided to you for the output. Okay, so for example, if okay, so maybe I will just explain you first what is regression and classification. So supervised learning, as I said, the truth label is provided, the output label is provided. They can be broadly classified into two types. One is the regression, another is the classification. So regression methods, I don't know, you might have seen the regression methods, and you might have done some hands-on with the regression method also in this entire lecture series. But just wanted to revise that, for example, if I give you a real life example, um, if you have a house prediction problem where you want to predict the price of the house, and let's say you have two variables. One is area of the house, another one is the age of the house, and based on these two areas you're predicting the price of the house. Okay, so how your algorithm will actually do is that your price of the house, let's say I'm calling it P. So your P, calculated this way, your P will be a function of area and age. Okay, and if I write down that um, even more elaborately, then it will be like this. So some variable A, some variable B, and some other variable C. So A, B, C, with this relationship, you will be able to identify the value of P. So what will be done is that you might be given, let's say you are given 100 data points. So the price is known for all this 100 data points for you. So when I say data points, that essentially means that the price of the 100 houses is available to you, and for those 100 houses, the area and the age is also given to you. So what you can do is that you can start assuming some random values of A, B, and C, and then with each input which is coming in, you are trying to improve on the value of, you're guessing the value of A, B, and C, so that your final price that you're calculating, for example, if the final price that you're calculating by guessing some values of A, B, and C is P1, and the actual, sorry, let's say Pi, and the actual value is Pj for that given area and age. Because remember, the output variable, I mean, the output is known to you in the case of supervised learning. Then your objective essentially is that you should minimize the difference between Pj and Pi. Okay, so there are different methods available for this. There are different optimization algorithms available for this. I'm not going into the detail of those algorithms. There are various books which are available, literature is available, but if you look into the libraries nowadays that you have, you don't have to worry about also the entire algorithm as such. You just have to worry about the application, okay, and how you can use those algorithms for your particular application. Okay, so this is nothing but an example of how you can see the regression. There are again various kind of regression methods. There is linear regression, logistic regression. They have different applications as such. Okay, the classification method is essentially the one where you want to classify some of the things. For example, if you have some example, let's say you are doing the insurance of the people, and you have certain age classification. For example, you can see that your algorithm has been fed with about 1000 1000 data points. Okay, where your objective, the end objective is just to enter the person's age and maybe profession, and based on the person's age and profession, you have to identify whether the person will be taking insurance or not. Okay, and if you think that the person will have a good chance to take the insurance, then what you can do is you can approach that person, try to convince them that you should take the insurance. So that's normally the way nowadays this insurance methods, and even the insurance advertisements that come onto your screen, they take the help of this particular thing. Okay, so for example, if somebody is working in some area where there are which may be accident prone, let's say, or there is a possibility nowadays due to the COVID, there is a possibility of infections and all, then there is a very high chance that the person would like to get an insurance from the company. Okay, so that's also one example of supervised learning. There could be other examples also which we can talk about. So that's basically regression and classification. Okay, let's move to the next thing. So when you talk about learning, what essentially is learning? Okay, so I've even moved one step back. Okay, we have talked about machine learning. We have talked about two different types of machine learning, which is supervised and unsupervised. And supervised, we have looked into the other two types, which is regression and classification. But when you are talking about machine learning, what exactly is the definition? Okay, or what is the classical way of looking at the learning as such? So how we as human beings we learn is pretty much the same way we can relate it to how a machine learns. Okay, so for example, we are learning to do some task. Okay, or basically improving on some task, and as we keep on doing things, our experience tends to improve. Okay, and as our experience improves, our performance measurement also improves. Okay, so this is essentially how we can classify the learning as such. For example, if you give a human experience in machine learning, so for example, you want to prepare for a test. Okay, so what you can do now is your objective or your task is to score good marks in the test, let's say, and your marks is nothing but your performance measure P. Okay, and the amount of the learning that you are doing, whether it is classroom based learning or whether you are doing it with the notes or we are reading a book, we are looking at some video lectures, these are all your experiences and you're solving some problems, you're revising, that's all a part of your experience. So as you have more and more experience, you would see that your performance, that is your score in your test would increase. Okay, so that's how essentially the machines also learn. So for example, you might have seen this very common handwriting recognition method, which is used in a lot of tutorials also for the data science and ML. So you can do this handwritten recognition using deep learning. You can do it using SVM based machine learning methods and all. So what is your task? Your task is essentially that if there are any handwritten words, you have to recognize them. Okay, and what your E might be, your experience could be the database of human labeled images. So more and more database you have, more and more experience you will get to predict the word. And what is your performance measure? That you are able to correctly predict the word. Okay, so handwritten word you are able to predict it correctly. So this could be a word, or this could be even a numerical number or something. Okay, so that is a example of handwriting recognition. Second one is a spam email detection. So for example, you are looking at the mails on a day-to-day basis, but you want to classify whether the email is a legitimate email or it has come from some random company. They want to get your password or some other spam information. So as a result of which the email actually goes into the spam. Okay, and the emails, the more and more emails you have in the database, the more it will have capability to predict it in the correct classified way. Okay, and again, if your email detection method is able to do a correct prediction, then the percentage of email which are correctly classified will increase. Let me ask one question here, and I think there might be a possibility of unmuting yourself and giving me a reply to this question. For example, if I'm talking about spam email detection, how do you think this method will work? Has anybody got any experience on working in this kind of thing? How do you think the spam email detection will work? I think you can unmute yourself and give me your answer. So the moderator, they can ask one person or two persons if they can answer this. You can even guess, that's fine. I just want to see that you're participating or not. Anyone?
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Spam detection is a binary classification where we go any binary algorithm to apply for this classification, and it is a classification approach. solve this problem.
So basically, you're taking all the emails and then converting them to binary first. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
Spam or ham?
Yeah. Anybody else? How when you okay? So let me ask you this thing. That whenever you look at a spam email, let's say an email has come from some random company, how do you generally identify that, okay, this looks like a spam email, that's not a legitimate email?
Using list of by viewing list of sender.
Viewing list of sentence or center, what do you
Sender.
say?
Sender.
Sender. Okay.
Yeah.
And what about the email body itself? Do you
Yes, sir.
sometimes look at
Yes,
the
sir.
email
Yes.
body?
There are various words which have been identified as not to be included in the body of the email.
Exactly. So I mean, I will maybe add one more thing there, that you will see that generally the spam emails, they are looking for your password, or they will ask you that, okay, you have to act immediately, you have to give your bank account number, or you have to do a major transaction, or you have won a prize. So some kind of this keywords will be there where you are supposed to be acting urgently. And then one participant also said that even from the sender email ID, um, you may be able to get an idea that, okay, this looks like a legitimate person or not, who is sending you an email. So what essentially happens is that you can create a dictionary of all these different kind of words, these buzzwords which people generally tend to use in the spam email. Okay. And then what you can do is you can start reading your email and then try to see that how frequently these words are actually appearing um, in your email. And based on that, you can try to train your model in a way that, okay, if this thing, um, this occurrence of this words goes beyond certain threshold value, then it can identify that this is, you can flag the email as a spam email, or if it is not, then you can flag it as a legitimate email. Okay, so that's one way. And again, you will see that people use a lot of I mean, this kind of dictionaries you don't have to create yourself. In fact, there are a lot of this kind of lookup tables are available um, online, and you can just call them with one command, and then they will be available for your help. Okay, so with that, you can do this kind of spam email detection. I'm not going into the driverless cars. This is also one explanation, but I'll be sharing the slides with you. So you just want to, if you just want to classify the T, P, and E, that is the task, performance, and the experience, you can do that. Okay, for the driverless cars as well as for the other applications. Okay, so let me first give you a brief overview of how this procedure of the entire machine learning uh, process takes place. Okay, so what do you do? First of all, you have the raw data with you, and what we will do is we'll try to take the example of the same house price prediction. So you can, let's say you have data of age, area, and you're predicting the price. Okay, so I'm just taking these two, and these are my inputs, age and area. Final is your price, which you are predicting is the output. So you're doing the raw data, and you will see that there will be a lot of data cleaning procedure will be going on. For example, you might see that there might be the age of 5, the area will be 1500, there will be 10, it will be 1000, something like this. And then suddenly you will see that there is someone with this 3, and this data would be something like not available. Okay, so if you simply give this not available data information in your system, then it might raise a flag. Okay, or it may raise an error that the information is not available to you and it cannot process it. So what you may have to do is that when you have lots and lots of data like this, so what you can do is you can take the age And for 3-year age households, what you can do is you can take the median, or you can take the average of the data and then fill this information. So that is called as the data pre-processing. Okay, so there is one thing you generally have to do as a person who is working with the data. Second thing that you may have to do is that, for example, right now I'm giving you very pinpointed to input data here, which is the age and the area. But when the data will be coming to you, you will see that the information may have lots of other aspects also. Like, for example, you have age, area, then you have a distance from certain landmarks. For example, the distance from your office, the distance from the school or something. And then you can even have the suburban area, which is in which area is this house available. Okay, so this could be a lot of different information which might be available to you. And then depending on your interest, you may choose some of the different features. For example, if you are mainly interested in having a house which is not very old, okay, but it should be close to your office. So then you may decide to choose, okay, the age and the distance is something which is more important feature for me, and the area and suburban, all these things may not be of that much importance. Okay? And then based on that, you may want to do your prediction problem. So you will have to do the data selection, as I said. I will come to the training and validation part a bit later on, but the other part is the feature extraction and the features as such. Okay, how many of you people are from electrical engineering background? Is anybody among here from electrical engineering background? The participants? Anyone can give me that information? Are you all from computer science, or there is a mix of electrical, computer science, mechanical people? What is the diversity in the audience? Just unmute yourself and say which area you are belonging to. Computer science, electrical?
From computer science.
Computer science? Okay. Well, I assume you say on behalf of everyone that let's say majority of the people are from computer science, but I will take an example of the electrical engineering here and try to explain you this importance of feature extraction. So in electrical engineering, you might have heard about that voltage and currents are the parameters that you generally measure. There could be power also. So voltage, currents, and power are, let's say, 3 parameters, and among these, the power is something which you can actually obtain from the values of the voltage and currents. So let's say only these 2 parameters, something which you are measuring. Okay, and then you want to identify that in your network. For example, right now I am in Chhattisgarh, so we are approaching close to monsoon now after a few days. And power cut is something which generally happens during the monsoon times, because the trees may fall off. There could be a lot of gusty winds which may go on, and there might be failures. Okay, the failures, the power failure or the faults in the system can further be classified into various types. So let me just write here faults. They could be of various types. For example, generally you have 3 phases. So there could be that all the 3 phases are under the influence of the fault, or there could be only 1 phase which is under fault, or 2 phases which are under fault. So there could be various kind of faults. Okay, just by looking at the voltages and currents, let's say if you want to identify that what kind of fault it is. So for example, if it is a single line to ground fault, a single phase fault, then rest of the other 2 phases can still be used to supply the power to certain community. Okay, Same thing is correct for the two-phase fault. In this case, at least one phase can be used to transmit the power to a certain colony or area. So what you have to do is from your voltages and currents, you have to identify the type of the fault. Now the point is that with just voltage and current, this piece of information, you may not be able to directly correlate to this fault information. So what you may have to do is you may have to find out another parameter by the help of which you may be able to correlate with this fault probably in a better way. Okay. So this is, for example, you may have to, from voltage and currents, you may have to identify, let's say, frequency. Okay. Or you may have to find out the harmonics. Now, don't ask me or don't worry about it that what the harmonics are. If you don't have background of understanding this part, at least try to appreciate this thing, that with the voltages and currents, you can find out these other quantities which can be derived from the voltages and currents or the given inputs, and they can be directly correlated to your final output. Okay, so this is something which is called as a feature extraction. So what you're trying to do with the given set of information, you're trying to extract some important features which we can use to do our function estimation, which is our last step. Okay, function estimation, and then based on the function estimation, you can derive your output. Okay, and this output, whether this output that you are getting is correct output or not, so for that you definitely have to have some evaluation criteria, and the evaluation criteria that you might be looking at something which is called as the mean absolute error, or you might be looking at the efficiency of the method. Okay, or some other method by which you're just trying to, or sometimes you call it accuracy. Okay, how accurate the information is coming to you. So there are different kind of criteria by which you can evaluate your final output. Okay, so what is that? What is the entire procedure? So the procedure is that you take the raw data, you do some initial data cleaning procedure and align the data properly. Then you do the data selection which you think are responsible or which should be good enough for your prediction problem. I still have to take the training and validation part, so I will just come that in a second. But then out of the data selection, if you think that you might need to have some more additional features, then you may have to do the feature extraction procedure, and then after that you can do function estimation. This function estimation is generally done by the algorithm for you, so you don't have to do it explicitly. And then once you get the function estimation, you can give any set of inputs and get the output, and whether those outputs are actually meeting your criteria or not, you can do it using the evaluation metrics and performance evaluation and find out a performance metric. Okay, so that's generally a part of it. Can you identify one problem here? I'm still not talking about training and validation. I will talk that in a second. But what is the problem here? The problem here is that, for example, if I give you a problem of this kind of a thing, okay, this problem I'm giving you, it is very important that you should have the domain knowledge of the electrical engineering to come from the given input data set to the features that you want to extract. Okay, so for example, from the given voltages and currents, you should be able to understand that how with the given inputs you will be able to get the frequency, or with the given voltage and current information, how you can obtain the harmonic information for you. Okay, and then later on with this frequency and harmonics, how the faults are actually related to this thing. Okay, so you need to have domain information. So machine learning generally is a method in which I wouldn't say a method as such, but machine learning in this process, it is preferable if you are having some sort of a domain knowledge. Having said that, you might see still a lot of examples of machine learning which are actually straightforward. You may not need to have domain knowledge, but if you are specifically using certain technique to predict the output, where the input cannot be directly correlated, it is beneficial to have the help of a person who knows about that domain. Okay. First thing, how deep learning is different from it. Deep learning procedure, actually you don't have to worry about the feature extraction thing, because what will happen is that deep learning is using a different neural network where the weights and biases are used for the different hidden layers, and it does some sort of a back propagation algorithm to calculate these weights and biases to identify the classification problem, whatever the output is. And in this process, actually, the feature extraction is not required. Feature extraction is actually done by the hidden layers for you. Okay. So definitely this is an advantage, because if I'm just giving the voltage and current parameters for a deep learning algorithm, you don't have to worry about calculating the frequency, harmonics. From the data itself, the hidden layers will be able to identify the different aspects of the data, and they will be able to identify the parameters or the features which will be important to identify your output. Okay, so that's one advantage of the deep learning. But having said that, you would also appreciate that it is always may not be possible for you to access the hidden layers and try to identify whether it might be extracting the features, but is it really extracting the frequency, or is it actually extracting the harmonics? That piece of information which can be readily available in the ML technique, in the deep learning technique, that may be hidden from you. Okay. So everything has certain advantages and disadvantages. Okay, or rather than saying disadvantages, I would say limitations. And for your purpose, you have to use it judiciously. Okay. So as I said, I mean, nowadays people are using machine learning and deep learning for various applications. And of course, the job market is good. There is a lot of competition among the people to learn this area. But remember one thing, that this machine learning, deep learning, artificial intelligence, they're just like tools. Okay. So for example, if you have problem in your bike, or if you have problem in your car, okay, your approach is first to identify the problem in the car. Okay. And then you try to see, you maybe try to open the bonnet and then try to find out the problem, whether it is the engine, whether it is some other part of the problem which is responsible for the car which is not starting. And then once you have been able to identify a particular part, then you use certain tool to maybe correct that part. Okay, you may have to remove it, or you may have to just do a bit of a servicing of that part and then plug it back again. Okay, so depending on the problem, you choose an appropriate tool. Sometimes what happens is that in this artificial intelligence and in this competition of learning all these methods and applying them, people do it in the other way. So what they will do is they will just open the car and they will use all the tools, and then they will just say that, okay, by using this tool, this is what we are getting as an output, and by using certain other tools, this is what we are getting as an output. That's not the correct way. Okay, so that's why I say that just by using knowing the tools is not important. It is also important that you should have some domain knowledge in which you are trying to apply those tools. Okay, so I have almost covered everything in this procedure section. The only thing that is remaining is training and validation data. So I would like to ask you this question, that if you have, let's say, 100 data points, and let me try to use this age, area, and house prediction price, this information with you. And let's say we don't have any information now. We actually have information for all the houses. So for a 3H house, and there is certain amount of area which is given here, and you will be having certain price. Okay, so I'm not writing the price, but you have some finite information here. My question to you is that when you're trying to identify the price as a function of age, area and age. Okay, you're using this data to find this function, and let's say you have 100 data points. Should you use all the 100 data points, or should you use some data points? What do you think your approach will be?
So
When you're
we'll keep some points to test for testing.
exactly, and generally what you do is that a rule of thumb is that you do 70-30 or 80-20, where 70% you use for training, 30% you are using for testing and validation, or 80% you are using for the training and 20% you are using for the testing and validation. It's as simple as that, that if you use the entire information which is given to you for training purposes, and then if some random data comes to you and you're predicting the output, you don't have any way to identify whether it is a correct prediction or not. Okay, until unless you have split your data into two parts, let's say 70-30, and you're doing the training with the 70%, and then you are testing with the rest of the 30%. So for the rest of the 30%, what you will do, you will just take your model of P is equal to this function, and then rest of the 30% you will just plug the value of areas and age. You will get the value of the price output, and you will try to compare with the known output that you have. And you can use any of this accuracy method or efficiency method to identify how accurate your methods is. Okay, so that's just a bit about training and validation part. Okay, so let me first see what that means. Okay, we still have about half an hour left. Okay, maybe I will go to first of all the k-means method. I've skipped some of the slides because they are slightly heavy on the power system part. I still have not information whether some of you are from some background of electrical engineering or not. But at least I will go to the k-means method, show you the clustering way, and then show you one of its application on the from the utility side of London. Okay, so I will show the application of this method. So when you talk about the k-means method, you will see a bunch of equations here. So I don't want to intimidate you with this information. The idea is simply that, let's say you have the 6 piece of information available to you. Okay, so there are 6 data points. You want to identify that among, what are the clusters in which these data points are residing? Okay, or what is a group in which you can divide these points? Now, some of you might say that looks very straightforward. It looks like this is one group and this is another group. Okay, fair enough. So as I said, these are very small number of points, so it might be not that difficult. But some of you might be saying, okay, this maybe can also look at this ways, that this is one set and then this is another set. And somebody might even say that in this particular set, there could be also 2 subsets which are like this. Okay, so that depends on how many clusters you want to identify. For example, if I just say that here I want to identify the number of clusters which are 2. Okay, so what I would do is that I will take the number of cluster centroid as M1 and M2, because the value of K here is 2. I want to, let's say, identify 2 clusters among the given data points. Then what you will do, you will take the step 2, and with each data point, okay, so for example, these 2 are the points which I have identified. Okay, these are the 2 points which I have identified as the location of my centroid. Okay, so these are some random information which I have chosen. Okay, it's very random information. Okay, and then I just want to see that whether this point belonging to this particular centroid or this particular centroid. So what is a good way to judge that part? Well, what I can do is I can take the distance of this point from these 2 centroids, and then whichever is the smallest, I will say that this particular point belongs to this centroid. Okay, Or for example, if I take this point, I take distance from here, let's say this is x1, and then I take for the same point, I take the distance from the other centroid also, I take is this as x2. Clearly looks like that x1 is smaller than x2, then I can say that this particular point belongs to this centroid. Okay, so I will do this, and what I can say is that, okay, let's say with this piece of information, I come to a conclusion that these 2 points, these two actually belongs to this centroid, and these 4 points actually belongs to this centroid. So what I will do next, my next step would be to update the position of this centroid. So what I will do, I will take the distance of this particular point, I will take the distance, or rather than saying distance, I should say the location. I will take the location of this point, I will take the location of this point, which are belonging to this center, and then try to update the position of this centroid. Okay, same thing I will do it for this centroid. So this is, let's say, centroid 1. This, let's say, centroid 1. This is centroid 2. These are point 1, point 2. So based on point 1 and point 2 location, I will try to update the location for C1. Okay, so ideally it should come somewhere in between P1 and P2. Okay, similarly C2, they should come in between all these 4 points. Okay, so I will do this thing, I will update it, and then it comes out that this point has actually moved slightly on this side, and the point which was initially for the centroid 2 has actually moved to this side. Okay, so this is my new location. What I would do next, I will do the same thing again. I will take the new centroid and take the distance of all the points from there. Okay, so again I can see that previously when the second centroid was here, the distance of this point to this centroid was smaller, but now it has grown bigger, and this point is actually close, this point is actually close to this centroid. Okay, so I will keep repeating this procedure, and then you will see that now you have another set of cluster. So this looks like that these 3 points are actually close to this centroid, and these 3 points are actually close to this centroid. Okay, and what is the next step? The next step is I will take the location of these 3 points and again update the location of my centroid. Okay, it just so comes out that now the location has come down to this point. I can again keep on doing the same thing, but you will see that there will be very minor changes in the location of this centroid. So after some point of time, I can say that my algorithm has come to a steady state. Okay, or there is a very minor error, or the tolerance in between the distances of the centroids from one particular position to another position is very small. So you can say that your algorithm has come to has been solved, and this is my final location of the centroids. Okay, so this is the final location of my centroids. And then you can say that, okay, this looks like one cluster and this looks like another cluster. Now I can take this clustering method. There are various other clustering methods. For example, there is an agglomerative approach, divisive approach, where you have to actually cut the dendrograms and all. But I'm not going into the details of that because I was just looking at the time. It's around 11:30. So I just want to show you one real life example. It will take about 10-15 minutes to explain that. So I will do it, and then if you have any questions, we can take that. So the example that I'm taking will actually take is actually an application of this clustering method only. But let me first give you a brief overview of what the data that is available to us. So the data that is available to us actually is from the smart meters. Okay, so we see that there is a large scale installation of smart meters all over the world. In India itself, we have various pilot projects to install smart meters in various states and cities, which are so-called smart cities projects, which has been taken up by the Indian government. So what we can do is that using the smart meters, we can actually try to identify the behavioral pattern of the customers or our consumers. And this can provide valuable information to the utilities. I will come back to this thing, that how it can provide valuable information to the utilities in a second. So once you have behavioral patterns of the consumers, for example, you can find out that whether the consumer is actually a mall or a person or a family or an industry. By looking at the electricity consumption, you can actually try to identify what kind of customer it is. Okay, and also from the number of kilowatt hours that it has been consuming. Based on that, also you can identify. Second thing is, once you have this pattern of the consumers, you can use analytical techniques which can be to extract other information which can be useful for the system operator. And you can always do some machine learning or deep learning kind of things in this. So let me just show you the kind of data set. And this is an example that I've taken from one paper. And this data that they are using is from the UK Power Network, which is the name of the project is Low Carbon London Project, which was conducted by the UK Power Network. And this was the data of the 789 consumers. And once, as I said, when you're taking the information of the 789 consumers, the information regarding their consumption is recorded after every half an hour. Okay, so you can easily assume the amount of the data. So 789 consumers, every half an hour the data is recorded. So in a day, for every customer, there will be 48 points. Okay, and for 48 points, you are taking the amount of the consumption that you're having. Okay, so power consumption, then you have time per hour, and then of course you have a consumer number. So you can see it's a 3D plot that I have shown on the right hand side. Of course, you will see that in this case also there might be some data which is missing, repeating. So you will have to do some data cleaning process. Okay, and after extracting the data cleaning, what you might have to do is that by just looking at the the power consumption, that means at this particular hour it is consuming this much amount of energy. That may not be a relevant information for the utility, so you may have to extract certain more features. So here the domain knowledge of the system operator actually comes into picture, that you can look at different features from the data set. So let me first show you those features. So the features which can be extracted can be like this: that what is a mean power consumption, what is a peak power consumption, when you are taking the minimum and the maximum power for a particular customer, what is the ratio between that. Their consumption may change from season to season, and then you can actually give them a score based on that season. What is the ramp rate? That means if your power consumption is increasing, at what rate it is increasing, and what is the volatility. I mean, for example, if it is a particular consumer which is only operating for let's say summer season, and then winter season, summer season it is having a lot of maximum power consumption, but suddenly when the rainy season comes, there is no power consumption whatsoever. So there is a lot of volatility. So these are some of the features which may need to be extracted to identify. Okay, but first we have to look at that what is the problem that we have to solve. So the problem is that let me show you what problem we are. Yeah. So problem is actually these two which you want to identify. So here is the thing. Generally, you will see that whenever people are consuming power, there is a certain pattern to it, and you will see that it's a very common thing that you will get a peak power consumption. So if I'm saying power consumption, if I just draw a load curve, this is called as a load curve, and let's say this is time. then you will see that generally in the morning there will be small power consumption, and there will be some peak during the morning 8 to 10 a.m. And then there will be again some low, and then in the evening there will be a sudden increase in the peak. It will be around 6 to 8, or actually 9 p.m., 6 to 9 p.m. There will be suddenly a peak again. So if of course this pattern may change from one consumer to another consumer. For example, if the consumer is mainly industrial, then you will see that the peak actually comes during this middle part, because in the morning, for example, if it is some office or so, then the peak hour is actually from 8 to 6 p.m. Okay. So depending on the pattern of the consumer, you can have this kind of load curves. The basic problem is that whenever this peak is there for the load, your generators have to generate that much amount of power, and also please consider the losses which it has to incur. So it has to, for example, if the requirement is, let's say, 12 kilowatt hour of power, you may have of energy, then you have to produce certain higher amount of energy by the generators, and then you may have to shift to some expensive generators. Okay, why I'm calling expensive generators, let's not discuss that at this point of time. Okay, so let's say the utility is operating with certain number of generators, but as the peak demand increases, they may have to fire up some other generators also, which are slightly more expensive for the utility to operate. So from the utility perspective, they would always like to have that if the consumers are actually slightly reducing their demand or slightly reducing their load in this peak time, then they don't have to, utility don't have to fire those expensive generation plants, and then basically as I said that the utility cost will actually come down, okay, for generation. And then if this is the thing, then please remember this, that I'm talking about crores and crores of rupees in this transaction. So it's a very relevant thing for the utilities. Okay, so it's not few rupees or few dollars which I'm talking about. So this thing is very important, that the peak shaving should be done. But when I'm talking about peak shaving, and let's say you have 789 customers, the utility cannot go to all the 789 customers and say that you should do peak shaving. Because some might be very small consumers, and even if they are just turning off their bulbs, that may not impact a lot to the utility. It is the big consumers or big customers whose profile has to be properly identified, their behavioral pattern have to be properly studied and then ranked accordingly, so that we are able to pinpoint our customers that can be included to be a part of this activity, where the utility asks them to shave off their peak demand. And this actually is called as a demand response program, okay, or the demand response application. And we want to identify the customers who can be a part of this demand response application. Okay, so that's basically what the problem is that we are trying to identify. And we have data from 789 customers. We have identified different features, and then based on these features, we want to rank the customers who can be a part of this demand response program. Okay, I hope the problem is clear to you. There could be various other applications. Okay, for examples, you may want to identify that from the given customer patterns, what should be the tariff prices. Okay, for example, you can say that during the peak time the tariff prices should be this much, or in the off-peak time the tariff price can be this much. Okay, that has to go through proper load regulation body, and so utility cannot just simply increase or decrease the tariff prices just like that. So it has to go through a proper justification, and for that also the consumer behavioral pattern can be of use. That's separate problem. Okay, so don't mix that problem with this problem. Okay, so there could be various other things which can be which could be thought about as a part of this application. And as I said that we have this various features, and what you can do now is that you can make graphs like this. And you can take one feature here and second feature here, or maybe I will do the other way around. So I will take the first feature here and the second feature here. I will make another graph. I will take first feature here and the third feature here. So first is X, the third is Y, X axis, Y axis. And I can just keep on plotting different points. And for all the 789 customers, you will see that these points will, where they are sitting on this plot, it will be in the form of this scatter plot. Okay. And then from this scatter plot, what you can do is you can use the clustering algorithms and try to identify certain clusters. Okay, so I may not have drawn it very properly, but I just want to communicate to you the idea. Okay, so you can see that there could be 2-3 clusters here which you could have formed. So some people might be even here, so that could be a third cluster. Okay, and based on this, where these customers are a part of different clusters, you can rank them. Okay, you can give a ranking to them, and then in the end you take all the ranks together, sum them up, and then finally give the ranking to a particular customer. Okay, so let me just show you. This is something you all know about, so I will skip this slide. So what is the step that I have done? I've just showed you in the last slide, but it is just written here in the words one more time. That take a pair of features, plot them, rank the clusters according to their importance. Okay. So if you think that the min to max ratio is very important for a particular customer, then rank it slightly higher. Okay, that totally depends on the operator. Then what you have to do, based on the cluster where a particular consumer is occurring, you have to give a score and you have to tabulate it, and then finally find the total score in each table and then sort based on the decreasing order. Okay, so these are how actually the different XY plots will actually look like. Okay, so you can see here the first is feature is mean, so all of these are actually mean, but the by features have changed. So here we have peak, here we have max to min ratio, here we have seasonal score, here we have ramp rate. So based on this X and Y parameters, you have 789 customers forming different clusters, and here we have marked the clusters with different colors. Okay, and based on the different clusters, we can give them a score. And based on different score, you can see that the first 15 customers which are there, we can give them a score like this. Then you can say finally the first customer has a total of 13, and customer number 5 has a total of 25. So with this way, you will actually find out I've just shown you the scores of the first 15, but you can obtain the scores of all the 789 consumers like this. And from that 789 consumers, you can then sort based on the highest number of rank. So you can see here the top 15 consumers have been identified like this. Okay, and based on their score, so you can see they are normally in the score range of 36. They are the top consumers. So these are the people, or these are the consumers which should be contacted by the utility to be included in their demand response program. Okay, so that's a typical activity that I have showed you with the demand response and the utilization of clustering method, which we have discussed in this talk for our application. Okay, so with this, I would actually like to stop, and I would like to take any questions if you have.
Well, in the very recent slide that you showed, the tabular format,
yes,
can you explain what do we mean by F0 to F1, and then
that is just a score that you are giving. For example, if you're so I showed you clusters with different colors. Okay, so with different features. For example, feature number 1 and feature number 9. Let me just try to see if I can show that. Just give me a second. Yeah. Okay. So. Are you able to see the screen? Yeah, it is coming up. You are able to see the screen, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
So F1, F0, F1, F2, these are nothing but the features. So we have taken some features here, right? So
So we,
F1 to F6. So you can actually say this is feature number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So similar way you have these features. So X is F1, Y is F0, X is F1, Y is F2, X is F1, Y is F3. So all this based on these features you can give them a score. Any other question?
so in that multiple XY plots, there was another what do you are you referring to X and Y in among these features that you quoted?
So for example, if you want to find the relationship, for example, if you are taking the mean power, okay, for every customer, you want to find out that what is the XY plot for the mean versus peak. So peak relation with respect to the mean,
अच्छा, अच्छा, ठीक
okay,
है.
for a particular customer, and then you're plotting all the 789 customers and then pattern their data on this plot, and then you can see that some of the people they have very lower amount of peak shown by black. Some of them have a very high uh, peak value with respect to the mean. So that depending on particular feature, you can you can cluster them and you can give them a rank. For example, I can say here that those with a green point will be having the highest rank. Okay,
Okay.
so those people who are in the green zone will get the score of, let's say, 3 or 4 or let's say 2. That totally depend on you how you want to frame this problem.
So is this being implemented in real time somewhere in some location?
Yes, yes. So this is a real case study that I have shown you
So,
from.
are you coming across some customers whom you are identifying like
Certainly,
I
in
use them?
India also right now we have a very flat tariff thing, but I think in the Andhra Pradesh they have actually the smart city project in which they are using the smart meters, and eventually they have the demand response programs where you can use this where they are trying to use this kind of thing to identify the customers.
Any frictions you are coming across from customers like you wanted them to become a part of demand response program and they are not willing as are you coming across some
Quite possible, because sometimes what happens is that if you're trying to look into the behavioral pattern of the consumers, then there is always a chance that if it's a data breach, then you may able to identify that when the particular consumer is actually in their home or not, and what is actually their behavioral pattern. That could also refer to few things, but that is totally left to the consumers. For example, whenever you are signing this. This this obligation to share your data, you know the information or you know the risk of sharing this information. I don't know specifically if there is any risk, but mainly a lot of big institutions and malls, they tend to share this data with uh, the utilities.
thank you sir.
Yes. Yes, any other question? Okay, so in that case, can I ask the moderator to take it forward?
Thank you, Agnihotri sir. Uh, your session was very nice. It went smooth. It started with the basics. You made us brush up the clustering techniques overview, and with the help of the case studies, live case studies, you made us explain how the clustering techniques are used for a variety of mining objectives in real-time domains. Thank you one again, sir. I request Partharai sir to please take over the rest of the proceedings. Khare sir, would you like to speak? Few words, sir. Okay, the audience are asking when the exam link will be shared. I guess Mr. Chiranjeev has floated feedback link of this particular session. So you first fill the feedback form. Very shortly you will be announced with the things. We have Roy sir with us.
Thank you, ma'am.
Prashant sir, thank you very much, sir. Padmavati, HOD, Computer Science and Engineering. Thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invitation and giving a very nice lecture, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, all the participants.
We can have a group
So-
photo session with Dr. Agnihotri Saab, with all of us.
So I will request all the participants to please switch on their videos so that we can have a group photo.
Partha sir, you write in the chat box also. I guess some of them might not have listened to the request.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all. So at 12:15 p.m. we will have the feedback and the final evaluation test. So 80% attendance and 60% passing marks are required. So best of luck to everyone.
Okay, Parji, can I leave then?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much
Okay.
for giving us your valuable time and knowledge, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Hope
Thank
for
you.
more collaborations with you. Thank you once again, sir.
Sure. Thank you.
Partha sir.
Yes, sir.
Sir, the link is same or the link is different for exam?
The link will be shared. I think it will be shared in the chat box.
Yeah. So we remain in the meeting or we leave the meeting and again join on 12:15?
Sir, we can join at 12:15, sir.
Okay, we can join with the
So
same.
the feedback link for session 16 is already shared in the chat box.
Sir, we already filled this one, sir. I am talking